Recording. The Great Lakes, America's inland sea, and honestly, Michigan's trademark. Honestly, it'd be tough to imagine Midwest without these iconic lakes. They've given a rise to industry, commerce, culture, and entertainment, and of course, water. But let's be honest, you can say this about most bodies of water, from the Mississippi River to the Colorado River to even the small bodies of water. So here's the question though. If we rely on them for just about everything, why do we not protect them as the vital resource that they are? Which brings on the other question. How do you protect the lake? How do you protect the river? Yeah, there are laws and regulations that already exist, but do they have the teeth to back it up? So, how can we expand these rights for lakes and rivers? Well, how about legal personhood? Now hear what you're saying. Lakes and rivers aren't people. That's silly. Inanimate objects as people. What a hoot. Am I right? Well, actually, they can. So, kind of, sort of. Let me explain, okay? So, first, however, let me do a quick disclaimer, though, okay? I am not an attorney by any standards. So do not consider any of this as legal advice. This is just meant as an educational video, and should many of the statements in this video be incorrect, I will remove it. As always, if you have any questions, please consult an attorney or relevant field expert. All right, well, with that said, let's continue. So actually, we already have a model of how a non-person entity can receive legal personhood. Let's just look at our old friend, corporations. Okay. So in 2010, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations, in a sense, have legal personhood and the rights granted by the US Constitution in the infamous case of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010. Now, I say in a sense because the question that was debated by the Supreme Court was not whether corporations had legal personhood, but rather the legal question can be summarized as A, whether regulations regarding restricting, quote, big money campaign contributions in support or denouncing individual candidates in elections restricts freedom of speech, and B, if those regulations apply to the parties of the case. And honestly, that's as far as I'd like to go into that case because we can go way deeper on the subject and it honestly deserves a video in its own right. And the outcome of the case has been discussed by many because of its controversial outcome and the impact that it has had. But ultimately, the result was that the Supreme Court ruled that corporations had the right to free speech and that through that received legal personhood. And while our situation might not be entirely the same, this case can help us demonstrate that it is possible for a non-person entity to be considered a legal person, while also giving us an idea of what this might look like for our scenario. Perhaps a committee of community members that have a stake in the health of the lake and river can compose a representative body, almost like a stakeholders committee. Or perhaps it can be covered by the most relevant government bodies, say the county or city government, which kind of leads us to our next point. Has this been done before? Well, I think it's time we talk about Toledo. Yeah, I live in Michigan, so oh god. All right, so just playing around. But anyways, no, yeah. Toledo surprised the nation when they joined the few communities that have given rights to the bodies of water and other natural environments. So honestly, way to go, Toledo. I tip my cup to you and totally not taking another sip of delicious coffee. So, some context, or rather some history. Lake Erie was experiencing severe pollution coming from the farms and urban areas that existed in the lake's watershed, including phosphorus, which led to enormous algae blooms, which asphyxiated much of the lake's wildlife. Then the decomposition removed a lot of the oxygen in the water, which led to even more wildlife death, and so on and so on. The water unfortunately got so polluted that these blooms and other chemicals forced the city to shut off the water. And again, the lake provides water to hundreds of thousands of people. And I also just want to state that this pollution came from everywhere. The pollution and the damage it caused, did not care about state or national borders. It just went and impacted communities all across the lake. This eventually led to the city of Toledo passing the Lake Erie Bill of Rights to grant the lake the ability to bring forward lawsuits when it has been damaged or harmed, meaning polluted and so on, with the goals that the lake will be cleaner and healthier for all to enjoy. And this city charter amendment passed with over 61% approval from the residents of Toledo. So again, way to go, Toledo. But unfortunately, the city charter amendment, as the city charter amendment was being passed, many had issues with it. And also, I'm sure that many of you have already kind of figured out a bit of it. And there was a bit of an issue regarding the city making legislation on a lake that extended beyond the city's limits. Both of these issues came forward when the agricultural company known as Drew's Farm Partnership sued the city of Toledo, claiming that the Lake Erie Bill of Rights infringed on the company's right to do business. This case and the Lake Erie Bill of Rights were then struck down by the appointed judge, Jack Sohari, who stated that the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was unconstitutional because A, it conflicted with or contradicted equal footing and public trust doctrines. It violated the supremacy clause of the US Constitution, and C, it is otherwise preempted by state or federal law, which in short can be summarized as because the lake goes beyond the city's limit, the bill in a way goes in contradiction to state and federal laws. So the question is, what now? Can lake rights be a thing, and will courts ever allow it? I'd say no. There is still another. In fact, many others. In fact, many others. 21 to be specific. I'm right now talking about the case of Juliana et al. Versus the United States of America et al., which was filed in 2015. Recording. And honestly, I want to say that this case is one of my favorite cases because I think it almost gives a hint of the many cases that we will begin to see. It's honestly a true underdog story with many twists and turns and a very impactful ending. So in short, some quick bullet points. In that the case was comprised of over 21 activists from across the country who sued the United States government, stating that the US government was violating their constitutional rights. And it honestly got farther than what most legal experts predicted. Most legal experts thought that the case was going to be shut down almost immediately. But surprisingly, it didn't. the lawyers made a good statement saying, a good argument saying that if the government's job is not to secure a healthy and safe future for their residents, then what is the government even doing? It then was passed from the district court to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And throughout this whole process, the Trump administration tried on multiple occasions to stop the case from going forward, but the Supreme Court allowed it to keep going forward. But ultimately, the Ninth Circuit Court shut the case down. All three judges stated that they believe that these plaintiffs did have standing to sue. However, they argued that this was beyond the capacity of the courts, and it really was more of the responsibility of the executive and legislative branches. However, the third judge affirmed the youth's constitutional climate rights, writing, "Our nation is crumbling at our government's own hands into a wasteland." And we can't forget about the words of the judge that began this whole appeal process, the judge Ann Eichen, who stated, "In exercising my recent judgment, I have no doubt that the rights to a climate system capable of sustaining life is fundamental to a free and ordered society." So I guess we're kind of back to what now? How can we make sure that the environment in which we live is secure? Well, I would say that honestly, it's time to be creative. It may sound a bit cliche to mention the year, but 2020 has been a year of unraveling. Many of the systems and concepts that we relied on have changed, disappeared, or revealed their many flaws that in many cases, we were too privileged or indifferent to truly see how flawed these systems and concepts were. But this year has also led to a global awakening of new ideas and concepts on how we can repair society and dismantle the systems of oppression that plague it. And the last three scenarios actually hold some of the tools that we will need to create this change. So let's begin. And we're gonna need a bit more coffee. All right, so back to the original question. How can we grant legal personhood to our lakes and rivers? Well, what have we learned? I'd say at least three important lessons. One, that the Supreme Court cases can lead to unexpected outcomes. Two, the legislative proposals should be decently okay within their respective governing bodies' jurisdiction, and so long as they do not go against the U.S.'s Constitution's supremacy clause. And number three is that we gotta be creative, continue fighting for the change that we all want. All right, so let's take a look at each one. So, number one, the Supreme Court cases can lead to unexpected outcomes. As we saw in the Supreme Court, and as we saw in Citizens United, the Supreme Court granted corporations the right to freedom of speech as to not violate the freedom of speech of the members of that corporation. So perhaps something similar can be accomplished as the concept of environmental damage being a violation of someone's constitutional rights becomes more popular to the point that it becomes the majority view. After all, at one point, the Supreme Court viewed segregation on the basis of race as legal. Just look at Plessy versus Ferguson from 1896. And now segregation based on race is illegal. Just see Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka from 1954. Then also stated in the beginning, perhaps communities, perhaps a community committee of impacted individuals or the most relevant body of government could become the representing body of the lake or river. Perhaps you can even become an elected commission, similar to county commission, with the requirements being that you are impacted by the health and well-being of the watershed in which you live. Now, I also just want to state that I do see a concern that these positions might become more available to people with wealth, especially as many have the capacity to purchase lakeside and riverside property. So perhaps the watershed can be broken into districts as everyone is impacted by their watershed, but one issue at a time. All right, so let's move on to step 2. So I think it's important that we take notes from Toledo's Lake Erie's Bill of Rights. If we want our Lake and Rivers Bill of Rights to stand, we need to make sure that the bodies of water fall entirely within the governing bodies or bodies that have enacted this bill or partner bills. Because lakes and rivers change, so it might be good to also include in language in the bill that states this. At least, and then also, at least in the beginning of this nature's right revolution, I think it's also important that we maybe focus a bit more on navigable bodies of water and some concepts from riparian rights, with some expansion, of course, such as the concept of the right for all to use navigable bodies of water. That way, this concept of lake and river rights has more of a legal ground to stand on. Then I think it's also important that we focus on navigable bodies of water, because they might help in the creation of this watershed districts. Again, if we continue with this idea, as it will allow them to most likely fall within the participating governing bodies. And then as the popularity for this concept grows across the country in local and state governments, we can then continue to move to federal legislation as to not be bothered by the US's Constitution supremacy clause. And we can expand these rights to lakes and rivers nationwide. And now the last point is that we gotta be creative. We gotta continue fighting for the change that we all wanna see. It's important that we popularize these concepts of nature's rights, because honestly, they're already established within our current laws, business laws, real estate laws, and so on. So it's honestly not that new an idea. So that is, again, why we need to normalize this, I guess, radical idea, which isn't really that radical, more common sense, because our future truly is our constitutional right. We have a long road ahead of us. I'm not gonna lie, it's gonna take a lot of effort and a lot of possibly difficult conversations with your friends and family. And of course, it's gonna take a lot of getting out of your comfort zone to reach out to your elected representatives on all levels of government and to participate in this movement to fight for the health and safety of our future. Because again, inherently, like, that is what lake and river rights are about. The health and safety of ourselves and our communities. But honestly, I'm sure that as long as we continue to be open-minded, caring, and active participants of that good trouble, in whatever safe capacity might be, I think we can do it. I truly think so. So with that said, class is adjourned, and your homework is to keep being awesome, and see you all next week. Take care.